Fletcher and I work within the creative team up at the Innovation Hub, and I'm really excited today to be introducing you to a brand new rare earth USB that's launching on Friday. Now it's called Delicious Digis and it's packed full with over 600 digital stamps for you to enjoy crafting with. And all I've done is I've actually printed off one of the digi stamps. So you can see it's a really beautiful design. There's lots in there. So this was all just one file on that USB, and don't forget you've got over 600 of these sorts of files in lots of different themes. So we've got florals, we've got animals, we've got sentiments, we've got absolutely lots. There's lots for you to choose from, and I think you're going to really love working with this USB. So I've just printed that off. You can see we've got the sentiment on there, butterflies, flowers, lots going on. And what I wanted to show you is that there's lots of different options for you when you're colouring in your stamps, whether they be digital or physical stamps. Now the brilliant thing about digital stamps is you can print onto whatever you like. As long as your printer takes it, you can print onto it, and that means you've got lots of different options. And I want to show you the difference between working with a water-based medium, so I'm using the Rare Earth Reactions ink pads, and also working with your ink Lilly pens. So what I've done is I've printed the digital stamp that I've just shown you onto some watercolour card. Now this is just tattered lace watercolour card, and it went through my printer really easily, and I think a lot of domestic printers will take watercolour card. So I've printed that onto my watercolour card. I've just trimmed it out, so it's about 14 centimetres across. And now one of the things you can do with digi stamps is you can take them into programs such as Minecraft Studio and enlarge them or shrink them down to whatever size you like, which gives you so much versatility, and that's really exciting. So what I've started doing is I've started colouring this in already using my Reactions ink pads. Now these ink pads are a mixture of both dye and pigment ink, which means they're really lovely to stamp with, to ink with, but also to do your watercolour colouring with, which is what I've done here. So I've coloured in the flowers, the leaves, one of the butterflies, and I just want to show you a quick technique on the other butterfly, just as to how I coloured in this image. So what I do is I take my ink pad, and I'm using Wisteria Wonder as the colour for this one. So you can see you've got the raised surface there. And then you need something that is non-porous, so a glass mat is absolutely perfect. And just sponge the colour out of the ink pad onto there. And now that is really important. It's really important that you never ever take your brush or water brush to the actual ink pad, because what you'll do is you'll end up diluting the ink within the ink pad. So the colour that you'll get in the ink pad will not be the true colour, it'll be more dilute than when you first bought the ink pad, which is not what we want. So remember to squidge it out onto something like glass mat. Now I'm working with a paintbrush. You can use a water brush if you find that easier, but I find personally I've got a bit more control when I'm using just a normal brush with water. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to wet my brush, and I've got some paper towel, you can use kitchen roll or something like that. I'm just taking most of the water off. We don't want to wet our paper too much because it can result in it buckling. So I'm just going to get some of the ink, so I'm using it just like you would a paint, and I'm just going to start with this final butterfly. So the way I tend to work when I'm watercolouring with ink pads is to start off with a very pale, watery layer to start with, and then build up a little bit of shading and depth from there. Now personally I find it really easy to work with ink pads when you're colouring, and I think a lot of us crafters do own ink pads at home, and it's just another use for them. And the Rare Earth Reactions ink pads are absolutely fantastic because they are this fusion of both dye and pigment ink. They give quite a nice chalky finish, and there's lots you can do with them. So don't just think of ink pads for being for stamping or inking the edges of your card. You can paint with them as well, as I'm showing here. So I've got a layer of colour over that butterfly now, but what we want to do is add a little bit of depth. So because I didn't use a lot of water to start with, it's going to dry pretty quickly. So I'm just picking up more ink with there being less water on my brush, and that's going to give me a darker tone. And I'm going to have the centre of the body slightly darker, and as we go out to the edges of the wings it's going to be slightly lighter, just to give us that little bit of depth. And using your ink pads to watercolour with will give you a really nice soft and subtle finish, that watercoloured type finish, which is really quite different to the effect that you'll achieve with your Lilly alcohol pens, but it's great to have lots of different options when you're stamping and using digital stamps for that matter. So I'm just adding a little bit more ink to the centre of the body, just very, very easily and simply, and you don't have to be really precise when you're working with watercolour mediums. You can be quite loose and sketchy with it if you like. That sort of all adds to the effect really. Just remember, don't use too much water because you don't want to saturate your card. And that is the sort of effect you'll get when you're watercolouring with your ink pads. So that was really quite quick and simple to create. I know I only showed you on the one butterfly, but the rest of the image didn't take a lot of time to actually come together. And because on this Digistamp there's so much going on, the composition has actually already been created for you. You don't need to do a lot to the card itself to make a really special and lovely looking card. So to finish this off, all I'd actually be doing is mounting that onto a thin border of black and onto my card blank. The card blank's just under 6x6, and that would give you a really pretty soft watercolory type style of card that I'm sure a lot of people would be really, really pleased to receive. Now on the other hand, we can colour in our Digistamps using our Lilly alcohol pens. So I've done exactly the same thing by printing exactly the same digital stamp off, but this time I've printed onto super smooth cardstock. Now it's really important that you think about what you're printing onto when you're thinking about how you're actually going to be using that image. So for the first card that I've just shown, I've printed onto watercolour card because I was using a water-based medium, and watercolour card takes the water better than a super smooth card would. Whereas now, because I'm working with alcohol pens, it's important to use a super smooth card. I'd recommend between a 250 or 350 GSM card, because it will take the alcohol ink a lot better and you'll get a smooth blend. If you use the Lilly pens on watercolour card, you'll find it harder to blend the colours together. And what I've done is I've coloured most of this image in, so I've used some different shades of pink, the greens, some greys, and I've just started on doing one of these butterflies in blue tones, and that's what I'm going to show you now. So a lot of the time when we talk about alcohol pen colouring, we talk about a 3-pen blend, but it doesn't always have to be just 3 pens. It can be more, or it can even be less, which is what I'm going to show you now. So the colours that I'm taking are 185 and 182, and these are both Lilly alcohol based pens. These are double-ended alcohol pens. On one end you've got a chisel nib, as shown here, and on the other end you've got a brush nib. I predominantly use the brush nib, but the chisel nib, as I'll show later, does have lots of other brilliant uses as well. So it's not just all about the brush nib. Remember, you can use both nibs and they're both really, really useful. So my darker colour is a 185, my paler colour being the 182, and I tend to work from light to dark. You'll find you get a more seamless blend that way because you're working with sort of when the colour's wet, and you'll find the colours will almost blend by themselves and it'll make it a lot easier. So I'm taking the paler colour, I'm using that lovely brush nib, and it's a rubber polymer brush nib. It's really high quality, and you'll see at the end it's got a really fine point so you can get into all the detail. And you'll see that a lot of these stamps that you'll find on this lovely new USB are really detailed and really delicate, and so you do need that fine point to be able to get into all that detail. So onto the butterfly. So when we're working with our Lilly alcohol pens, and we're laying down our palest tone to start with, sort of like a base coat, so similar to what I did with the watercolour, what we try and do is we work in small circles, and that's going to give us an even coat of alcohol ink all over that image. Now, working in your small circles, you're able to go right up to the edge, right up to the line, and don't forget to rotate your cardstock as I am here. Rather than trying to rotate your wrist and potentially get in a slightly uncomfortable position, rotate your card so that it's easiest for you. So now I can see I've got a blue butterfly, but there's no sort of depth and dimension to it. So that's where the 185 comes in. I'm going to add a little bit of shading using this pen. So brush nib again, and one of the fantastic things about the brush nib, aside from being able to get into all the lovely detail, it also allows you to use a flicking technique to create lovely effects on your stamped images. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the body, and again, like I did with the watercoloured image, I'm going to have the centre of the body darker and going out to lighter at the edge of the wings. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to flick. And remember, still turn your paper and just flicking outwards. So it's really soft and gentle. Don't press on too hard. And as you come up to the edge of the flick, just bringing the pen up, almost like you're ticking somebody's work, like you're a teacher. Just flicking, and it's really, really simple, but it'll give you a really lovely effect, and only with 2 colours of pen, which is absolutely amazing, really. So just flicking outwards, just like so. And I find it easier personally to flick upwards rather than downwards, but you'll probably find what works best for you. You might not agree, but that's absolutely fine. It's all about finding what works best for you and what you're most comfortable with to make crafting the most enjoyable it can be. So there we go. As you can see, we've got the darker section in the middle, fading out to the paler section. And that sort of technique is pretty much how I coloured in the whole image. So I used the flicking technique again on the flowers, and you can see it's given a really nice effect. What I would do is, similarly to I have with the first card, I'd mount this onto black. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to show you one of the fantastic uses for the chisel nib of these Ink Lily pens. So I've coloured in a few of these flowers using a warm grey tone. I'm going to choose one of the warm greys that was in that blend, which is WG1. I'm going to take the chisel nib, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to very gently edge the edges of the cardstock. So just running that pen along the edge of the cardstock. It's really easy to do, and it's one of those things, once you start doing it, you'll be doing it all the time. But it does give a really nice effect, so that's absolutely fab. So just going along there. Now, as I say, I chose the grey to pick out those flowers. It just makes the image pop just a little bit more. So to finish that off, all I would do is mount that onto the card as shown. So as you can see, by choosing different mediums, different cardstocks to print onto, different ways of colouring, you can get 2 really quite different effects from just one stamp. And don't forget, the brand new Rare Earth Delicious Digis USB has got over 600 of these stamps on. So think of how much versatility you're going to get within that one USB. Don't forget, with it being digi stamps, you can enlarge them, shrink them down, take them into your programs like Minecraft Studio, flip them, rotate them, create your own compositions. The options honestly are endless. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I can't wait to see what you create with your new Rare Earth USB.